Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mariana Gonzalez, the Deputy Commissioner here at Homeland Security for Disaster Recovery Program. I want to thank you all for taking time out today to join us as we discuss the recently declared emergency declaration for the severe winter storm and snowstorm. As you all know, this was a historic winter storm that buried many New Yorkers in upstate communities with nearly 7 feet of snow. As you're all aware, Governor Hochul was able to submit a request to the federal government for the emergency declaration, which was then granted on Sunday, November 20th. The last time New York submitted an emergency declaration request for a similar winter storm was back in 2014, when it took weeks to have it granted. So we're very excited that we were able to get this done in record time. The emergency declaration is for Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, Genesee, Jefferson, Lewis, Niagara, Oneida, Oswego, St. Lawrence, and Wyoming counties. In addition to discussing the recent emergency declaration, we're also going to discuss the next steps as New York State continues to pursue a major disaster declaration. We'll discuss what is covered under a major disaster declaration and any pertinent dates. As you all know, we do have a time frame that we have to abide by in order to pursue the major disaster declaration. We also have other requirements, which we will talk about later. I do appreciate greatly the partnership that we have experienced over this time as we continue to work to secure all the expenditures related to this declaration. I know many of you have been in touch not only with OEM staff here at DISHES, but also with our recovery staff, and many of you have already started sending in your expenditures related to the emergency declaration. I greatly appreciate your attention to this, knowing that everyone has competing priorities they continue to manage. So without further ado, I want to introduce Patricia Debly from our Disaster Recovery Public Assistance Team, who's going to serve as also the contact for submitting your request for public assistance for this emergency declaration. Thanks, Trish.
Thank you, Rihanna. Hello, and welcome to the applicant's briefing for Emergency 3589, the Federal Disaster Emergency Declaration for the damages caused by the severe winter storm and snowstorm. My name is Patricia Debly, and I am with the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, or more commonly referred to as the acronym DHSES, pronounced DISHES. This presentation and the narrative will be posted on the DISHES website shown on this slide. We will be posting other pertinent information as it develops, so we urge you to visit the website frequently and take advantage of the information posted there. We have a lot of very important information to pass along to you today, so please mute your phones and laptops so that we can cover the material and everyone can hear the presentation. The federal government assigns a disaster number to every federally declared emergency, and the number for this New York emergency is EM-3589. There are some very important regulatory deadlines that must be met by applicants. Many of these deadlines are triggered by the declaration date. For EM-3589, that date is November 20th, 2022. We will cover these deadlines later in this presentation. The incident period for EM-3589 is November 18th, 2022 through November 21st, 2022, which means that all damages must have occurred on those dates and be a direct result of the snowstorm in order to be considered for eligibility by FEMA. In addition, certain emergency protective measures taken in anticipation of the storm may be eligible, even if they were performed prior to the incident period. The federal cost share is set at 75%, which means applicants will incur a 25% local cost share on their projects. While in many past disasters, the state has picked up a portion of the local share, this decision has not been made at this time. The FEMA Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, otherwise known as the PAPA G, in effect for EM-3589 is version 4. PAPA G version 4 can be found on the FEMA.gov website and the DISHES website, and in the Resources tab of the Grants portal once you are approved as an applicant. This slide shows the key personnel assigned to manage EM 3589. Lai Sun Yi has been assigned as the Federal Coordinating Officer. DISH's Commissioner Jackie Bray is the Governor's Authorized Representative and State Coordinating Officer. DISH's Deputy Director of Recovery Programs, Rihanna Gonzalez, is the alternate Governor's Authorized Representative and Deputy State Coordinating Officer. And Bernadette Moran is the Disaster Assistance Manager. This slide shows the counties currently declared for EM 3589. As you can see on the map, this storm affected areas of Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, Genesee, Jefferson, Lewis, Niagara, Oneida, Oswego, St. Lawrence, and Wyoming. The emergency declaration only covers direct federal assistance and Category B emergency protective measures, which will be discussed later in this presentation. What is public assistance? The key is to remember that the FEMA Public Assistance Program is a reimbursement program that provides financial assistance to eligible applicants recovering from the impact of the declared event, the November 2022 snowstorm. Proper documentation of the work performed will be crucial to an effective and timely reimbursement process. This slide shows the FEMA Public Assistance process steps. We are now in the applicant briefing phase and will cover the remaining process steps in this presentation. The submission of the Request for Public Assistance, or RPA, is one of the most important steps for applicants. The deadline for potential applicants to submit their RPAs for EM 3589 to DISH's ends on December 15, 2022. FEMA will deny late submissions unless the applicant and the state can clearly show that it was due to circumstances beyond their control. Simply stating that a key person was on vacation or you were occupied with other issues will not be sufficient, and FEMA does and will continue to deny late RPAs. We encourage you to act immediately on this requirement. The RPA packets for both governmental and private not-for-profit entities are available on our website. If you have questions or need assistance, please contact us immediately. Once your RPA is approved, you should immediately begin preparing your damage inventory, if you have not already done so. FEMA will assign a program delivery manager, and DISH's will assign a state disaster representative to assist and guide you through the process. The first contact after the RPA approval will be the exploratory call. This introductory call is designed to identify the applicant's damages and needs and to schedule the recovery scoping meeting, or RSM. During the recovery scoping meeting, the state and the applicant will review the applicant's damage inventory and start formulating the damages into logical projects. The recovery scoping meeting starts the 60-day clock for the applicant to formally identify all damages to FEMA. It is critical that all damages be identified and recorded on the applicant's damage inventory within this 60-day period, as the grants portal will automatically lock the applicant out after that date. If there are valid reasons that preclude the identification of all damages, such as inaccessible damage sites, you must notify your FEMA state team immediately so arrangements can be made to assess those sites as soon as possible. Please be aware that oversights, competing priorities, staff turnover, and poor record keeping or other circumstances within the applicant's control generally will not justify the addition of damages identified after the 60-day window has expired. Applicants should already be undertaking a comprehensive survey of the damages and costs they incurred as a result of this disaster. FEMA's goal is to conduct the exploratory call within 7 days of signing up program delivery manager, and to conduct the recovery scoping meeting within 21 days of the exploratory call. The deadline to identify all damages within 60 days of the recovery scoping meeting is a hard deadline, and failure to meet it may result in damages that were identified late being denied. This pyramid shows the tiers of eligibility. All 4 tiers must be eligible to obtain FEMA funding. We will cover all of these starting with the bottom tier, eligible applicants. This slide shows the types of eligible applicants under the FEMA Public Assistance Program and should help you identify which category your organization falls into. State, local, and tribal applicants require only basic documentation to file their request for public assistance. For private nonprofit organizations, commonly referred to as PNPs, FEMA requires additional documentation, and we will cover those requirements later in this presentation. To begin with, PNPs must also provide documentation that shows they own or operate an eligible facility where eligible services are performed within the declared county in order to be an eligible applicant. This slide shows the required minimum documentation that must accompany the RPA packet for all private nonprofit applicants. Applicants must identify the eligible services provided at their facility. Eligible PNP services are listed in FEMA's Papa G version 4. FEMA may also ask for additional information if they deem it necessary to decide the applicant's eligibility. The next tier of eligibility is the facility. Facility is defined as any publicly or PNP-owned building, works, system, or equipment, or certain improved and maintained natural features. Unimproved areas such as fields or natural stream banks are not eligible. In order to be eligible, the facility must be the legal responsibility of the applicant, have damages caused by the November snowstorm, be in use at the time of the disaster, and not under the authority of another federal agency. For Federal Highway Administration, FHWA roads, however, FEMA will cover eligible emergency protective measures. For a PNP facility to be eligible, the facility must have been in use for an eligible purpose at the time of the declared event. For EM 3589, most costs will be for eligible emergency protective measures necessary to ensure public safety. For work to be eligible for FEMA PA program, it must be required as a direct result of the declared disaster, the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant, located in a declared county, and completed within regulatory timeframes. Declarations for snow are severely limited in type of work that is eligible. Although specifically requested by the governor, EM 3589 did not include snow assistance. DISH's leadership is working with FEMA to try and include snow assistance for those counties that meet snow of record criteria. Unless EM 3589 is modified to include snow assistance, routine snow removal is not authorized. Routine plowing of roads and streets is also not authorized. Snow removal plowing is only authorized when it is reasonable and necessary to perform other eligible emergency protective measures. For example, to clear the snow to repair a down power line or to get fire apparatus to a reported building fire, for emergency medical needs, or for search and rescue when stranded motorists have been reported. This slide shows another significant deadline that is initially triggered by the declaration date. Deadlines for completing the work on an approved project. For emergency work, applicants have 6 months from the declaration date to complete the approved scope of work. New York State can grant an additional 6 months extension for a total of 12 months from the declaration date. This declaration does not include permanent work categories. Damages to infrastructure caused by the performance of eligible emergency work can be included in the Category B project. This slide shows the categories of work under the FEMA Public Assistance Program. As you can see, they are broken into 2 major categories: emergency work, categories A and B, and permanent work, categories C through G. Emergency 3589 authorized only Category B emergency protective measures. Category B emergency protective measures are measures taken before, during, and after an event that saves lives, protect public health and safety, or eliminate an immediate threat of significant damage to improve public and private property. Examples of such measures are shown on this slide. As previously mentioned, normal plowing of roads is not eligible. Plowing in order to perform an eligible emergency protective measure, such as plowing to get fire apparatus to a building, fire, or rescuing an individual stranded by the snow would be eligible. Under FEMA's Papa G version 4, FEMA will now consider the time the applicant is taking to resolve the immediate threat when evaluating whether the measure is eligible for reimbursement. Please take this into account when planning your emergency protective measures, as unnecessary delays may jeopardize your reimbursement. As we mentioned, eligible costs for snow declarations are limited. FEMA Program and Policy Guide, Papa G version 4, Chapter 7W and Appendix H contain detailed information on work eligibility. This slide shows the normal eligible costs for a snow assistance declaration. These costs are normally limited to counties that meet snow of record criteria. Again, EM 3589 does not currently authorize snow assistance. Permanent work damages caused by the storm, such as collapsed roof due to snow weight or equipment damages while performing eligible work and not due to negligence, may also be eligible. Again, normal plowing of roads is not considered an eligible expense. If you encounter a cost that is not listed or unsure, please out to the recovery point of contact listed later in this presentation for additional guidance. Emergency Operations Center operations, EOC operations, search and rescue, and sheltering are other emergency protective measures that may be eligible, and these are not restricted to the 48-hour period and are eligible in all counties declared under EM 3589. If you have other costs not listed and have questions, please reach out to us for guidance. As we mentioned, there may be occasions where snow damages to permanent type work occur. In these cases, that work may also be eligible. In addition, damages caused by the performance of eligible work that are not attributable to negligence, faulty equipment, or operator error may be eligible and may be included in the Category B Emergency Protective Measure project. If you have such damages, please reach out to our staff for guidance. As we mentioned, eligible costs for snow declarations are limited. FEMA Program and Policy Guide, Papa G version 4, Chapter 7W and Appendix H contain detailed information on work eligibility. This slide shows the normal eligible costs for a snow assistance declaration. These costs are normally limited to counties that meet snow of record criteria. Again, EM 3589 does not currently authorize snow assistance. Damages while performing eligible work and not due to negligence may be eligible. Again, normal plowing of roads is not considered an eligible expense. If you encounter a cost that is not listed or unsure, please out to the Recover POC listed later in this presentation for additional guidance. For snow assistance, all work must be within the applicant's designated 48-hour period. Applicants that have multiple locations, such as New York State DOT, may select a different 48-hour period for each location. Estimates must contain the methodology the applicant used to develop the estimate. Contract costs must follow procurement procedures, and copies of the contract must be provided. Force account costs must include summary sheets that contain the appropriate information. For example, force account labor costs must include employee name, title, date, time, work performed, location, rate of pay, and fringe rates. Equipment summaries must include type of equipment, capacity, such as 5-ton dump, 10-yard dump, etc. Work performed, location, date, time, and the operator information. Although only overtime for force account employees is eligible, be sure to report the regular time for those employees operating equipment to validate equipment costs. Materials must list the type of material, i.e. rock salt, quantities used, locations used, dates, and time. Keep in mind that any dumping sites are subject to FEMA's environmental and historic preservation review, so stay away from environmentally sensitive areas such as wetlands, and do not dump in waterways. Please make sure that you follow the appropriate procurement procedures if you're using contractors for eligible work. If damages occur during the performance of eligible work, such as to curbs and light poles or equipment, the applicant must document the date, time, and location of those damages. Salting and de-icing costs are also limited to a 48-hour period as selected by the applicant. The documentation listed is the minimum requirements needed to request a joint preliminary damage assessment with FEMA. Once FEMA reviews the documentation, they may ask for additional clarification. FEMA's environmental and historic preservation specialists perform compliance reviews on all projects to ascertain whether the applicant has met applicable federal environmental and historical preservation laws, policies, and executive orders. Applicants must obtain all required permits for their projects from the appropriate regulatory agencies, which may involve the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and other agencies. Please pay particular attention to these requirements as FEMA can deny funding on your project for non-compliance. Again, if you're not sure about what you can or cannot do, please ask for guidance before you act. Applicants must comply with both federal and state legal requirements. While some state requirements, such as the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or CEQA, mandate certain procedures, they are not identical to federal requirements, and you must still ensure that the requirements of the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, are met. For example, in some previous snow declarations, applicants dumped snow into the Hudson River. That is prohibited by environmental laws and regulations. If we get snow assistance authorized, make sure that you're not placing the snow where it will impact any environmentally sensitive or protected areas. If you're not certain how to proceed, please ask for guidance before you act. If you're dumping or staging snow, you must provide the GPS coordinates of that location. Historic sites require consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, and the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, SIPO, as appropriate. Please keep in mind that historic sites are not limited to building-type structures. There may be other facilities that have historical significance. Any structure that is 45 years or older must be reviewed by SHPO and sometimes by SIPO before repairs can be made. Keep that in mind should there be damages to an historic facility, as failure to comply may result in loss of funds and potential penalties that could cost you as the applicant dearly. If there is repeating, the applicant should seek appropriate guidance before proceeding. FEMA is prohibited from duplicating benefits, so FEMA deducts all other sources of funding used for the scope of work on your project from your FEMA grant. The most common additional funding source is insurance. However, any other source, such as federal or state grants and monetary contributions from any source, public or private, must also be deducted. The Public Assistance Program also imposes a mandatory obtain and maintain insurance provision on all insurable damages that exceed $5,000. Failure to comply with this provision will jeopardize FEMA funding and render the facility ineligible for public assistance in the future. Proof of compliance will be required prior to the project closeout. And the final tier of eligibility is eligible costs. These include the cost for your own employees, equipment, materials, and supplies purchased or taken from stock and properly contracted services to perform eligible work. Management costs are those costs applicants incur for the administrative work performed to submit their public assistance projects to FEMA. We will discuss management costs later in this presentation. FEMA will review every project to ensure the work performed was reasonable and necessary to address disaster-related damages and will apply the appropriate deductions for any funding received for the same work from other sources, such as insurance proceeds. For the applicant's employees, their salary or hourly rate plus fringe rates are reimbursable for hours spent performing eligible work. FEMA may require the applicant to provide a fringe rate for both regular and overtime rates for their employees. For emergency work, the applicant's budgeted employee costs are generally eligible only for overtime while engaged in eligible emergency work. Both straight time and overtime is eligible for the applicant's temporary employees performing eligible emergency work. Force account equipment is equipment you own, purchase, or lease, which is used for eligible work. Equipment is generally reimbursed based on hours of usage. FEMA gives credit for a full workday if equipment is used for half of the regular workday or more. For example, a DPW worker drives a truck with a trailer and loader to a project site and then uses the loader to work at the project for 5 hours, loads it back on the trailer, and drives back to the DPW yard. The truck and trailer are only credited with the actual hours in transit to and from the project site, but the loader that was used for 5 hours can be credited for a full workday since it was used for more than half the workday. FEMA cost code established hourly equipment rates. For leased or rented equipment, reimbursement is based on the rental lease agreement. When it is necessary to purchase equipment to perform eligible work, FEMA may reimburse the purchase price minus the salvage value, or the applicant can simply claim the hourly usage on that equipment. When salting and sanding are approved, cost codes can be adjusted to account for the salting and sanding equipment. Force account materials such as road salt or brine are those that you use from your stock or purchase for the eligible project. If you use materials from stock, you can document the cost by using invoices, if available, or obtain 3 quotes from local vendors to establish the replacement cost. You do not have to replace the materials taken from stock and used on your FEMA project before claiming reimbursement for those materials. Donated resources are labor, material, and/or equipment donated by a third party. For emergency work, category B, the value of donated resources can be credited to the total combined local share of all the applicant's emergency work projects. For example, the applicant has 5 emergency work projects totaling $500,000. The total local share of the 5 projects would be $125,000. If the applicant assumes the entire local share, the applicant can claim up to $125,000 in donated resources. All purchases and contracts must meet all local, state, and federal procurement requirements. Please pay particular attention to the mandatory contract provisions identified in 2 CFR Part 200, Appendix 2. If some procurement procedures are suspended due to an emergency declaration, FEMA will require the applicant to justify the scope and duration of the suspension. FEMA reviews purchases and contracts for compliance to make certain your documentation is in order. As stated on the last slide, all contracts must meet local, state, and federal procurement requirements. FEMA will review all contracts for compliance. If the contract is found to be non-compliant, FEMA may deny the project. Competitively bid contracts with a fixed cost and well-defined scope of work are preferred. Applicants who use mutual aid will have to comply with the provisions of those mutual aid agreements. If the agreements do not call for reimbursement to the provider, FEMA will not reimburse through mutual aid. But the applicant may be able to use the aid provided as donated resources. If the agreements do call for reimbursement to the providing entity, the entity must bill the applicant for eligible costs, who will then pay the provider and submit those costs to FEMA for reimbursement. Lump sum contracts are acceptable and easy to monitor as they do not require the applicant to document the quantities used. Time and material contracts can be used, but require additional control measures. They must be reasonable and contain a cap, such as not to exceed $200,000 or not to exceed 70 hours of work, which the contractor violates at their own risk. The idea behind time and materials contracts is to allow the applicant to respond quickly to an emergency. For scopes of work that will be performed over longer periods, applicants are expected to comply with normal procedures and procurement contracts. Be aware of types of contracts that may jeopardize reimbursement. A cost plus percentage of cost contract is where a contractor says they will do the work for whatever it costs them, plus a percentage of that cost. For example, the contractor spends $100,000 on the work and the percentage agreed on is 15%. The contractor receives $115,000. In this type of contract, there is no incentive for the contractor to work efficiently and swiftly. The more costs they incur, the larger the profit. This is an ineligible contract, and FEMA may make your project ineligible if you use it. Don't refer to FEMA reimbursement in your contract. Making a contract contingent on reimbursement from FEMA will make it ineligible for reimbursement from FEMA. And finally, do not contract with a debarred contractor. Federal procurement regulations have a requirement to actively solicit minority and women-owned business enterprises. The requirement does not mean simply putting a notice in the newspapers as part of your bid process. For example, language in a publication that says MWBE enterprises are encouraged to reply does not satisfy the requirement to actively solicit them. You need to identify MWBE contractors in your area and show active solicitation via email, telephone contact, or regular mail, and invite them to bid on your project. Failure to do so may make your project ineligible. Next, we will discuss Category Z projects. FEMA will reimburse an applicant's direct and indirect administrative costs incurred by submitting and processing its FEMA projects. Reimbursement is based on actual documented administrative costs and is capped at 5% of the total of your obligated projects. Please submit your streamlined project application for Category Z management costs in FEMA's grants portal. Applicants must submit full documentation of management costs. The federal share on Cat Z projects is 100%, subject to the 5% cap based on the total obligated projects. The management cost policy is contained in FEMA's interim policy 104-11-2. Public Assistance Management Cost Interim and FEMA's Public Assistance Management Cost Standard Operating Procedures. There's also guidance on this process available in the Resources section of Grants Portal. This slide shows some of the eligible management costs. Please begin capturing your administrative costs, including the costs incurred to attend today's applicant briefing. You will need to document your administrative costs before requesting closeout and reimbursement for your Category Z project. Reimbursement can only be claimed for management costs incurred during the applicant's authorized Category Z period of performance, which is defined by whichever the following occurs first: 180 days after the applicant completes its last non-management cost project, or 180 days after the latest performance period of the applicant's non-management cost project, or 2 years from the date of the emergency declaration. Currently, the project completion period of performance deadlines for Category Z projects in Grants Portal and EMI may be inconsistent and generally incorrect. You must use the period of performance criteria just discussed to understand when the deadline for submitting your Category Z project for closeout is triggered. DSHS must submit its recommendation on the applicant's Cat Z closeout to FEMA within 180 days of the expiration of the applicant's Cat Z period of performance. So applicants should submit all their Category Z closeout documentation to DSHS within 90 days of their Category Z period of performance. Over the past few years, FEMA has been refining the process by which it delivers the public assistance program, and we will discuss some of these steps in a moment. This slide shows the steps using FEMA's Grants Manager, Grants Portal systems. Grants Manager is the FEMA side of the system, and Grants Portal is the applicant side. For EM 3589, there may be few, if any, site visits required. There are 4 phases of public assistance projects under the FEMA's delivery model. Each phase contains multiple steps. The process begins with damage assessments immediately after an incident occurs and culminates with project obligation, completion, and closeout. We are now in phase 1 at the applicant's briefing. To participate in a FEMA disaster recovery, applicants must establish a Grants Portal account. Grants Portal is the applicant side of the database where FEMA projects are now developed. It replaces FEMA's old database, which was called EMI. Many applicants have established Grants Portal accounts as a result of participating in the COVID-19 declaration. All projects and documentation are now submitted through Grants Portal. Once an RPA is approved, you can proceed with the recovery scoping meeting and start to formulate projects in Grants Portal. Currently, projects are still obligated in FEMA's old database called EMI, but that functionality will migrate to Grants Manager in the future. For emergency work, Category B, Emergency Protective Measures, there is a streamlined application format in Grants Portal for applicants to utilize. If you have not participated in a recent disaster declaration, you might find that the titles for various roles have changed, and FEMA's delivery model now incorporates consolidated resource centers where much project development is coordinated. In any event, DSHS will assign disaster assistance representatives, otherwise known called DARs, to all applicants to assist you with your recovery. There are various elements of a project that will be necessary to develop in order to process your project. It is important to remember to thoroughly document all the information to support your project. This includes an applicant's decision-making process, invoices, contracts, insurance policies, claims and settlements, actual costs, personnel policies, procurement documentation, proof of payment, permit applications and responses, etc. If you do not provide the required documentation, FEMA may issue a request for information, or RFI, and withhold reimbursement until you comply. DSHS representatives will be available to assist applicants with developing their project. You must provide a complete list of all your damages to FEMA within 60 days of the recovery scoping meeting. Grants Portal will automatically lock the applicant's damage inventory list after 60 days, and FEMA has discretion to deny any damages identified after that deadline. This slide lists the normal site inspection process. Site inspections are not required for completed work. If there are damages that require a site inspection, FEMA's site inspectors will inspect those damages. These inspections may be in person or virtual, depending on circumstances. Therefore, it is important that you capture all the necessary information to document your damages, to include photographs, GPS locations, quantities and dimensions, site access issues, environmental or historic preservation issues, and mitigation opportunities. The site inspection results in a site inspection report. Make certain that the site inspection report fully and accurately captured all relevant damage information. FEMA has several consolidated resource centers located throughout the country. Disaster declarations for New York have been handled primarily by CRC East in Virginia or the CRC Atlantic, which is in Puerto Rico. CRC operations are divided up by lanes based on the type of projects they handle. FEMA will accept an estimate provided by an applicant that contains the necessary detail as shown on the slide. FEMA may request additional information if the information provided is insufficient for them to validate the estimate. FEMA establishes project thresholds for each disaster. You must meet a minimum monetary threshold for an eligible project. In order to qualify, a project must have eligible costs of at least $3,800. All projects are then categorized as either a small project or a large project. Small projects are those under $1 million, and large projects are those at or over $1 million. Let's discuss some differences between small projects and large projects and the requirements for each. Small projects are obligated and paid based on the approved cost estimate. Once approved, small projects are generally not amended to reflect changes in actual cost unless the applicant successfully appeals for a small project reconciliation. Applicants must promptly submit the completed P4 form to the Disaster Assistance Manager as soon as the work is complete to trigger closeout of a small project. Large projects, on the other hand, must be paid based on actual costs, so they require a formal accounting process for closeout. Where appropriate, applicants may request progress payments for the portion of work on a large project that is already completed and fully documented, including necessary permits and proofs of payment. Applicants must promptly submit the completed P4 form to the Disaster Assistance Manager as soon as all the work on a large project is complete to trigger the large project final accounting process. At that point, DSHS personnel will coordinate with the applicant to review all supporting documentation for the project and make a recommendation to FEMA regarding final payment and closure on the large project. Also, applicants are required to submit quarterly progress reports on all their large projects as long as the project remains open. The Disaster Assistance Manager will prompt you to submit this report each quarter. DISHES will also provide additional briefings to applicants that specifically address the quarterly reports and closeout requirements. There are several standard items that FEMA typically deems necessary to support most projects. When you are working on developing your project, make sure you have the necessary documentation. Again, we cannot stress enough the importance of documenting all your actions and costs in support of your project. Failure to do so will jeopardize your FEMA funding. The Recovery Transition Meeting provides an opportunity for the applicant to review their projects with FEMA and DISHES field personnel in order to make sure that all eligible work undertaken has been captured in one or more projects and submitted into FEMA's grants portal. It is at this point that you will be transitioned to the DISHES Disaster Assistance Manager, who is Bernadette Moran, who will then be your primary point of contact for any further actions that may be necessary, including the scope of work, change requests, quarterly reports, time extension requests, and closeouts. When FEMA obligates your project, you will receive a project application notification from the Disaster Assistance Manager in the form of an email with attachments. It will include a copy of your approved project and the P4 form you will use to certify project completion. Please make sure you promptly return this form as soon as your project is complete so DISHES can submit it to FEMA and have the project closed in the system. Receipt of the project application notification email also starts a 60-day clock for an appeal, so please review the approved versions of your projects promptly and closely when you receive the notification, and make sure everything is in order. If it's not, please contact the Disaster Assistance Manager immediately. All projects must be closed. For small projects, no formal accounting is required, but the applicant must submit the signed P4 project completion and certification form to the dam immediately when the project is complete. Please track your projects carefully and submit the P4 as soon as each project is completed. For large projects, submitting the P4 triggers a formal accounting process. The applicant must submit the signed P4 immediately upon completion of a large project and be prepared to provide all supporting documentation for the project. Please coordinate with your Disaster Assistance Manager and manage your projects to ensure compliance. DISHES will offer additional briefings to applicants focusing on the quarterly progress reporting and closeout process. The work completion date is the date an applicant physically completes the authorized scope of work. Once an applicant completes the authorized scope of work, they must promptly submit the project to DISHES for closeout by submitting the signed P4 form to the Disaster Assistance Manager. For EM 3589, it's Bernadette Moran. Delay in completing the closeout process may jeopardize your FEMA funding. FEMA imposes deadlines for submission of the supporting documentation required to close the project out. Applicants have 90 days following the completion of their project to submit all the required supporting documentation to DISHES. Failure to provide the documentation within the required period will likely result in loss of funding. So please make sure that you are tracking your project and comply with these requirements. If you have any questions at any time, please contact the Disaster Assistance Manager immediately. An applicant may appeal any FEMA determination. You have 60 days from FEMA's transmission of the determination, such as the project application notification or a FEMA determination on letter or memorandum to submit an appeal on that determination. This 60-day deadline is for submitting your complete appeal package to DISHES, not just a notice of intent to appeal. We have an appeal team at DISHES who will assist you in developing your appeal upon request. The small project reconciliation is a particular type of appeal. If you find that the estimate or costs on your small projects combined were insufficient, you may file an appeal for a reconciliation. You must file the appeal within 60 days of completing your last small project. FEMA will then review your actual costs on all your small projects. If there is a net cost overrun on all of your small projects combined, FEMA will obligate the additional funds. However, if it is found that you have net underrun, FEMA may de-obligate the overpayment. For this reason, applicants contemplating a request for a small project reconciliation are strongly encouraged to contact the Disaster Assistance Manager to request assistance. FEMA may transmit a determination memorandum or letter via any method that confirms receipt, such as a PA Grants Manager, Grants Portal certified or return receipt email, or an email with a read receipt acknowledgement. There are 2 levels of appeal within the FEMA Public Assistance Program. The first level appeal is to the FEMA Regional Administrator, which in our case is Region 2, with offices in New York City. The second level appeal is available if the first appeal is unsuccessful, and it goes to the FEMA Deputy Administrator for Recovery in Washington, D.C. If an applicant can elect to go to arbitration in lieu of a second appeal if certain criteria are met. Please discuss this option with the DISH's appeals team if you are interested. While the applicant elect to have legal counsel and expert witness in arbitration, those costs are not reimbursable. Here are some pitfalls to avoid. Please make sure that you follow all the procedures, guidelines, and regulations, and as we have said through this presentation, if you're not sure of something, raise a question to your Disaster Assistance Manager and get an answer before you proceed. FEMA grants are subject to audit by both the New York State Office of the Inspector General and the DHS Office of the Inspector General. You must be able to produce the backup documentation on all your projects should you be audited. The documentation uploaded into the grants portal does not meet this requirement. You must maintain a complete file in your office of each of your projects. So what's next? You will need a grants portal account. Submit your request for public assistance so DISH's can create your account for you and you can be approved as an applicant in EM 3589. FEMA's Category B project template is now available in Grants Portal and you can start compiling your emergency work projects using those templates. FEMA state personnel will be assigned to assist you, FEMA and state personnel will be assigned to assist you in the development of all of your projects. So the next steps regarding the major declaration. If snow assistance work is claimed, make sure you adhere to the 48-hour period requirement. The documentation must be specific. For example, for sheltering, it must contain the location, time, number of individuals sheltered, and costs. For other eligible measures, such as response to stranded motorists, fires, down power lines, etc., you must provide supporting documentation such as call logs. The documentation we listed is the minimum requirements needed to request a joint preliminary damage assessment with FEMA. Once FEMA reviews the documentation, they may ask for additional information or clarification. And here's the DISH's office contact information if you have any questions. And this last slide contains some additional resources for you to consider should you need more information on the recovery process. On behalf of FEMA and the state of New York, we look forward to assisting you in pursuing reimbursement under the Public Assistance Program. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Corinne Franchini, who will moderate questions.
Thank you, Patricia. I just want to direct everyone's attention to the bottom right corner of your webinar screen. There is a little chat bubble there. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat. You can also find links to our disaster page that has the emergency disaster page link, as well as our DISH's public assistance link. First question that we have received in is from Paulo Adino. Would you mind going into detail about how the state and county meet the thresholds for damages, and if the threshold is met, what is available to the entity to receive public assistance, et cetera? Thank you.
Okay, that's a great question. So the first thing I want to point out is that we have a declaration for an emergency. That is limited in what's available. So I'll talk about what's available to eligible applicants in EM 3589 right now, what could possibly become eligible, and what would be in a major disaster declaration if we get that. So first, what all the eligible applicants in those 11 counties can get are emergency protective measures, including but not limited to search and rescue, emergency utility repairs for damages caused by the snowstorm, like downed power lines, emergency medical evacuations, sheltering, and EOC operations. And you may do limited snow removal in the vicinity of the facilities where those emergency protective measures are taking place. So if you have an actual downed power line and you need to move snow for the repair crew to get to that downed power line, that limited amount of snow removal is currently eligible under the emergency declaration. Now, beyond that, we're looking at whether we can get snow assistance included in the emergency declaration. We're still discussing that issue with FEMA. If it does become eligible, then that's where the activities where we talked about a 48-hour period for each applicant to determine their cost for snow removal, de-icing, sanding, salting, those activities would also be eligible. Currently, right now, we don't have that determination from FEMA. So if we do receive that for the emergency deck, we will notify applicants of that. And in any event, we're trying to collect all that information because we need it to support a request for a major disaster declaration, which would include that snow assistance damages that I just mentioned for all counties that met their snow of record. So we realize that we are asking you to provide a lot of information, and it's possible that not all of the damages that you report to us will wind up being eligible, but we have thresholds that we have to meet in order to get the major disaster declaration. So we need to collect all of the information up front.
Thank you, Joe. So there are two similar questions. It is, will we have access to recording of this webinar, and will the presentation and slideshow be available to the public? Which,
sure.
That will be. It will be posted on our website. Again, there are links that are posted in the chat that can direct you either to the page for the emergency as well as to our public assistance page that also has previous webinars posted on there as well. There's a webinar section, and we'll have both the slide presentation and a recording of the webinar on our website page.
And our slide deck will include the narrative that Trish read out. So you'll have all that information.
Next question. Does the town and village have to submit an RPA to the state if they already have done so in the FEMA grants portal?
Yes, you have to submit an RPA for each declaration. So if you've been in prior disasters and you submitted an RPA for them, that was your entry ticket, so to speak, to that disaster. If you want to participate in EM 3589, you need to submit an RPA for 3589. If this becomes a major disaster declaration, I believe you may have to also submit an RPA for the major disaster declaration once it's declared.
It's a question, it's Joe Carl again. It's a question there is, if you submitted your RPA request to the portal, do you also have to submit a copy to the state? The answer is no. It goes through the portal, we will see it in the portal and act on it in the portal. That again is for governmental applicants. PMPs may have other requirements.
Thank you. And for the 15th deadline, do we need to submit a breakdown of forced equipment labor and overtime labor, or just the totals?
You need to break out the overtime labor, because what we have to report is the potentially eligible costs when we're seeking the major disaster declaration.
Thank you, Joe Simpson. Is overtime and fuel eligible for days plowing out?
The fuel costs are not calculated separately because they are in, they're part of what goes into the calculation of the cost code that is used to reimburse the equipment use.
Thank you, Joe Simpson. Does a school district and fire district need a FEMA grants portal?
Yes, every potential applicant needs to have their own grants portal account.
Can you provide the counties who met the snow of record levels?
We have not, that is Joe Carl, we have not validated that with FEMA yet. Our unofficial figures at this point tell us that Erie County met the snow record, Jefferson County met the snow record, Wyoming County met the near snow record, and we're currently looking at Lewis and St. Lawrence counties as being close. We have requested from FEMA their official snowfall reports, and once we get that, we'll be able to determine which counties will definitely meet those snow records.
Thank you, Joe Carafi. Would EOC costs also be included in a major declaration or just under emergency 3589?
Yes, EOC costs are eligible in a major declaration.
Thank you, Joe Simpson. If snow removal is a major cost, how will we be notified of its changes? Or should we file an application to keep our fingers crossed?
You should, our recommendation is always to submit any eligible costs you think might be reimbursable. Sometimes there are issues that come up, like right now with the snow assistance policy, where we don't have a set answer right up front, but we'd rather you submit a request and then find out it's either not eligible and you withdraw it or it gets denied or whatever, rather than miss a deadline to submit something that could be eligible because you weren't sure.
Thank you. Would towing of standard vehicles be eligible under emergency 3589, or would towing be eligible under a major declaration?
Towing is going to be eligible if you are doing it in support of other eligible work. So, for example, under the current declaration with just emergency EPM, Cat B EPM activities allowed. If you have, say you have a downed power line and there is a car stuck in front of that utility pole, you have to tow that car to perform that emergency repair on the downed power line. That is eligible. If you're just aware that there are cars buried in the snow alongside the highway and we have not yet been granted snow assistance, and you're saying, well, I need to tow cars in order to plow the highway, at this time, that's not eligible. But if we get approval for snow assistance, and you are doing that snow removal and de-icing, salting, such, and you need to move those cars in order to perform that work, then that towing would be eligible. But of course, it's always subject to the caveat that you have to look at other sources of reimbursement, including, going after the owner of the vehicle and seeing if their insurance or whatever might cover the cost of that towing.
And Joe Carl, keep in mind that those types of costs, should we get snow assistance, are going to be limited to the 48-hour window.
Right.
So keep that in mind as you work up those costs.
So Joe and Joe, would you advise at this time that potential applicants submit those costs as we continue to look to pursue a major declaration?
Absolutely.
All applicants should be submitting those costs. We have our personnel are reaching out to counties, OEM people are reaching out to counties to capture those costs so we can make the assessment as to where we stand relative to the thresholds for a major deck.
Thank you, Joe and Rihanna. At this time, this question is kind of related to what we've already spoken on. At this time, is it safe to assume that additional costs, overtime, and equipment necessary for snow removal to maintain access to critical facilities will be ineligible?
Under the current emergency declaration, that is correct. As I said, we are pursuing a decision from FEMA to grant snow assistance on the emergency deck, and if that is not successful, we're also pursuing the major disaster declaration, and it may become eligible under that if it's granted.
And to that point, make sure you're capturing those costs and documenting the items that are required to support it, as we indicated in the presentation.
Thank you. Are repairs to equipment covered?
Repairs to equipment are only covered if that damage occurred as a result of performing eligible emergency work. Normal repairs and maintenance to the equipment is not covered.
Thank you, Joe. What are the range of dates for the event included in this?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What is the range of dates for the event included for this disaster?
So the declaration that we received said, I believe, November 18th and ongoing. And I think informally, we have heard that the incident period is going to be the 18th through the 21st.
Thank you. Can a fire district piggyback on a town, or do they have to go in alone? Like, do they have to submit their own RPI?
It depends on whether the town has legal jurisdiction over the fire district. If the town does have legal jurisdiction over that fire district, they can go under the town. If they do not, they have to submit themselves.
Thank you.
Go.
Where can we find equipment vehicle cost calculations that include fuel use?
All of the cost codes are based on a combination of typical maintenance costs, depreciation, and fuel costs.
You just mentioned a 48-hour window should snow costs be allowed. You just mentioned a 48-hour window where snow costs should be allowed. Would this window be different than the incident period of November 18th through the 21st?
It would be a 48-hour period selected by the applicant within those dates of the incident period.
No, that's not true. The 48-hour period is a period the applicant removes the snow, in this case, that occurred during that incident period, and they select a 48-hour period during which they perform that snow removal. Doesn't have to be within those 3 days. Within the 3 days is when the event must have occurred, the damages must have occurred, snowfall, etc. The removal of the snow is a 48-hour period after that.
If FEMA grants inclusion of snow assistance under Emergency 3589, then is pursuing a major declaration still necessary?
The major declaration, has a couple of other criteria, including the county threshold and the statewide threshold. So we are going to pursue that regardless of whether snow assistance is granted in the emergency deck.
Again, the questionnaire, there might be some other types of work costs. For example, permanent work might be included in a major declaration that is not an emergency deck, which is limited to emergency work only. But if we're getting the snow assistance in an emergency deck, then an evaluation will have to be determined. One, can we meet the threshold to the 35 million? And are there costs that we cannot get in the emergency deck that would be eligible in the major deck? And that decision will be made by leadership.
Do you expect this webinar to be available on the links you have provided before the RPA deadline of December 15th? Yes, we will have that up, hopefully the next day or two. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions. Do you want to hold it open for a minute? Okay.
As we mentioned, our folks are out there reaching out to the counties and reaching out to the applicants to collect the data that we need to support our assessment of a major deck. If you have any questions as our folks reach out to you, please ask. If they don't have the answer for you at that point, they will get an answer or raise the question to us, and we'll make sure that that response gets back to you.
We just had 2 more questions come in. The City of Rochester Fire Department sent a Type 5 US&R team at the request of New York State's Office of Fire and Prevention, OFPC, to Erie County. We performed the work in Erie County during this time. Should we still file an RPA on the FEMA portal?
If you are from Rochester, you are not in an eligible county, so you cannot. That would be a request for mutual aid. So now you'd have to determine under what conditions or agreements that was performed. So if OFPC directed that and you performed that and you have costs, then you'd have to work that with OFPC. And if you, again, are entitled to reimbursement, you bill OFPC. OFPC will reimburse you, and then it's OFPC's responsibility, as they are an eligible applicant, to submit those costs to FEMA.
Thank you. Will you provide the county through their contact us with your office?
Will we provide the county? I believe we have the contacts in the slide deck. If you're talking about you're having questions or issues submitting your RPA, Patricia Devley, at the information shown on the slide right now, would be the person to contact. And if you have other questions, you certainly can get them to her, and we will get you an answer.
Okay, currently I'm not seeing any other questions posted. I am also posting again in the chat the link to the public assistance website. And do you want to hold it open for, oh, one more question came in. Cleaning snow from fire hydrants, acceptable for pay?
But not at this point. Now, while that is a emergency protective measure, it is not one that is authorized under snow unless we have a snow assistance declaration.
But if you have expenditures related to that, you should be submitting them so that way we can do the assessment as we look on the major, correct?
Correct. Submit those costs, and also, as Joe pointed out before, if that cleaning of that fire hydrant is necessary to perform an otherwise eligible emergency protective measures. For example, you're responding to a fire and you have to clear the fire hydrant in order to attach the hoses, yes, that would be eligible for that case. If you're clearing the fire hydrants in your municipality, just strictly to be prepared in case, then that under this declaration is not eligible.
Thank you. When will FEMA decide whether or not to include snow assistance in emergency 3589?
At this time, we do not have a timetable, but we are in constant communication with our partners at FEMA. And as soon as we have a change in information, we'll make sure we message that out to all the individuals that it impacts. But again, we strongly encourage you to submit any expenditures you experienced thus far that could possibly count towards the threshold as we continue to look and assess whether or not we meet the requirements of a major declaration. That is not off the table.
Thank you, Rihanna.
And if I could just add, one form of communication that we do use is grants portal disaster-wide notifications. So for those who have their RPA submitted and approved, when we have information like that, we will put in a notification that will be sent out as an email to those who have their RPAs approved. So that's another reason to go ahead and submit your RPA, get your account, submit your RPA sooner rather than later if you think you might have any eligible damages.
Thank you. The link to the public assistance shows the initial registration for the webinar. Will this webinar slide, slideshow be on there as well? Yes, we will be posting the slideshow and the webinar on that page directly. Will there be communication sent out if snow assistance is added to emergency 3589?
Yes, as Joe Simpson mentioned, we will be utilizing grants portal to communicate to those that do have an RPA submitted. However, knowing that it may need to reach a larger audience, we will be notifying individuals that we know have already looked at potentially becoming an applicant under the declaration, as well as posting it on our website, so that way folks are fully aware. We do ask that you continue to check in with your point of contact that you've already established and or the website, because this is a very dynamic situation.
And we will also publish that information through the emergency managers in each county and the OEM regional directors, and try to get it as widespread as we possibly can.
Thank you, Rhiannon and Joe. I don't see any questions currently. Want to hold it open for another minute? Oh, no, not yet.
Another question?
No, just that we have a couple of people in the chat saying thank you.
Well, we just want to thank you all for your time. We appreciate all the work that you've done on behalf of New York and that you continue to do. We, continue to think about all of you that continue to be buried. We're buried in the snow. We appreciate all the efforts that have already occurred and that will occur. We thank you so much for your partnership. I know it's very difficult to respond to an emergency and at the same time document your response to the emergency and submit all that paperwork. But as always, we in New York want to make sure we secure whatever funding is appropriate and available through FEMA and other means. So again, we greatly appreciate your partnership, and when in doubt, have the conversation, reach out to recovery staff. We are here to help. We want to work with you to make sure that we secure every eligible dollar possible. And then again, as we get more information, we will be good stewards of information and share that with you, along with letting you guys know where we land as far as pursuing the major declaration. So again, have a good evening and thank you for your time.